nigga Skip, if you want to F up, do that on your own time. He has 17 chances. So we want him to give him 18? I'm gonna give him 18, but he gonna do it on his own time. Everything you ask for as a child and as you're coming up praying, and what do? As soon as you get it, you mess it up.
This story really sucks, and I hate the fact that I'm gonna have to bring it to you guys here today, but unfortunately, there are times on this channel where we're gonna have to bring you cautionary tales to make sure that these issues never occur again. So before we get to the content, make sure you drop like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. Now that we got all that out of the way, so we have a $1,000 giveaway from Prize Picks. They're giving 5 of us a chance to win $1,000. All you have to do is click the link in the description down below to sign up for a chance to be selected to make a 5-pick flex to win $1,000. Use my promo code Mikerophone to get up to a $100 deposit match on Prize Picks. Now let's get to the video. Mike check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Coming out of high school, Antonio Callaway was a 4-star recruit. So it's good enough for him to get a scholarship to the University of Florida. During his time at Florida, there were some allegations levied against him. In his freshman season, he had a remarkable season for a freshman, by the way, 35 receptions, 678 yards, 4 touchdowns. And in his sophomore season in 2016, he improved upon that with 54 receptions for 721 yards and 3 touchdowns. Antonio Callaway was lauded for his route running and his speed, but unfortunately, he would be suspended all of 2017 as a result of an alleged sexual assault levied against him. Now, Callaway would be found not guilty of these accusations, and very shortly after, he would declare for the NFL draft. Now, you guys know how the NFL draft process works. The process is quite literally a bunch of NFL teams nitpicking to see if there's anything wrong that you have done to make sure that you could get drafted a little later and hurt your value. Something like an allegation that was levied against Antonio Callaway, whether it's true or not, could damage his draft stock just from the allegation alone. We saw what happened to Matt Araiza, and even more so, we saw what happened to Sean Oakman, which we made a short on, which I highly recommend you check out. So after missing a full season of football and declaring for the NFL draft, a player that was once considered to be a first-round selection, who had a respectable combine, by the way, with a 4.41 40-yard dash and a 10-foot broad jump, in a draft that isn't necessarily known for how deep their wide receiver class is. We're talking about a draft that had DJ Moore go in the first round alongside Calvin Ridley and Cortland Sutton in the second round, then DJ Chark in the third round, and I guess Michael Gallup in the third round as well. This was a draft that Antonio Callaway could have definitely broken into the first round of. And that's nothing against the other wide receivers, just sometimes to be the top wide receiver in a draft class, it turns out to be a game of inches. And if Callaway didn't have that unfortunate incident levied against him, then there would have been a chance where some teams would have preferred him over DJ Moore. But at that point, he was perceived to be a risk, and a lot of teams unfortunately were right about him. Regardless, the Cleveland Browns couldn't pass upon this opportunity. The Browns had one hell of a draft this year. They made a splash with their first pick, surprising the entire world by selecting Baker Mayfield, quite literally because they just thought he was a winner. 3 picks later, they made their best pick of the draft by selecting Denzel Ward. And in the beginning of the second round of the NFL draft, they selected Nick Chubb. At this point, John Dorsey was on fire, and he wanted to make a huge splash at the wide receiver position. So the Cleveland Browns decided to trade their 114th overall pick and their 178th overall pick, which is a 6th round pick, to the New England Patriots in return for the Patriots' 4th round pick, which is 105th overall. And with that pick, they selected Antonio Callaway, which at that point was considered to be a huge steal, because if Antonio Callaway ends up flopping, then, well, you didn't really give up much to get him. But this was a guy that was perceived to be a first-round talent, and you got him in the 4th round. Without a doubt, a very underrated draft class for John Dorsey, and if he had selected Josh Allen perhaps with the first pick, then he may still have been a Cleveland Brown general manager at this point. But almost immediately, there would be trouble for Antonio Callaway. Shortly after signing a 4-year, $3.17 million contract with a $717,000 signing bonus, Callaway would be under a microscope, not only in regards to the Cleveland Browns front office, but also because that was also an offseason that featured HBO's Hard Knocks. And man, this was definitely one of the more underrated Hard Knocks, because there are so many storylines, from Baker Mayfield potentially being the future culture of the Cleveland Browns, Corey Coleman demanding a trade with the cameras on, Jarvis Landry giving a very passionate speech about changing the culture of the Cleveland Browns, to Des Bryant pulling up and saying he'd be interested in signing with the Browns. This is definitely one of my favorite Hard Knocks seasons. But one of the issues that arose during this season was in August of 2018, Antonio Callaway was already in trouble. He was given a citation in Ohio for the possession of marijuana and driving with a suspended license during a traffic stop at 3 a.m. Now, luckily for him, the Devils lettuce charges were dropped and he would have to pay just over $900 for the violation. Antonio Callaway actually had a very promising season in 2018. Baker Mayfield would even go on to say that Antonio Callaway was his favorite target on the Cleveland Browns. And Antonio Callaway had one hell of an opportunity here. I mean, this was the season that the Browns traded Josh Gordon to the New England Patriots. So you pretty much have Antonio Callaway, Jarvis Juice Landry, which is a completely different type of wide receiver than Callaway was, and Rashard Higgins as Baker Mayfield's top targets. And in Callaway's defense, he made the most out of his rookie season, playing in 16 games and getting 43 receptions off of 79 targets and 586 yards and 5 touchdowns. But the very next summer, 1 year later, Callaway would once again bump into trouble. Antonio Callaway would get suspended for the first 4 games of the NFL season for violating the NFL substance abuse policy. For lack of a better way of saying it, Antonio Callaway couldn't
stay off the weed.
Once he was reinstated from his suspension, Antonio Callaway would start showing up to meetings and practices late. And at this point, the Cleveland Browns had enough. They decided they were out on the Antonio Callaway business. Also because they decided to trade for Odell Beckham Jr. the offseason prior. But at this point, you could say Antonio Callaway's career was already on life support. He tried to make a comeback in 2020 in the XFL, but we all know what would happen in the spring of 2020. Fortunately, the COVID pandemic would start, and Antonio Callaway wouldn't really get a chance to really show what he was made of in the XFL. Regardless, he got another chance. In September of 2020, the Miami Dolphins gave Antonio Callaway a chance and signed him to their practice squad. He would serve his suspension, and then he would get elevated to the active roster on November 14th for a game versus the LA Chargers. After being a bubble player for the Miami Dolphins and not really doing much, he get cut there as well. Then he would get signed 3 weeks later by the Kansas City Chiefs, but he would sustain an injury, which would result in the Chiefs cutting him. At this point, you could see that there's a pattern here. Teams would give Antonio Callaway a shot, and either you would get really unlucky with injuries, which happened to be what happened with him in the Chiefs, or he would just shoot himself in the foot. Finally, Dallas Cowboys decided to throw Antonio Callaway a lifeline, deciding that this young man was way too talented not to be signed onto a team. Callaway was still in his mid-20s, and this was his opportunity, as the Dallas Cowboys wide receiver position was up for grabs after trading away Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup dealing with injuries throughout the season and not looking like himself throughout the season, and who even knows what the wide receiver 3 position is going to look like. Callaway could have came in and been the wide receiver 3 for the Cowboys easily, and although he wasn't able to fulfill that promise, as the Cowboys would sign T.Y. Hilton later on, he would get signed to a reserve/future contract by the Cowboys on January 25th, 2023. And this brings us to where we are currently. You would think that this is Antonio Callaway's chance. First opportunity he's had to stay on the same team for over a whole season since he was a Cleveland Brown. But of course, right when he had an opportunity to save his own career, things got way worse. As according to Andy Slater, Dallas Cowboys wide receiver Antonio Callaway was arrested in Miami on Saturday. The reason why is unbelievable. Callaway had a warrant for driving with a suspended license and failing to pay, and that's the reason why he was suspended. And I think this is just a series of stupid events because I feel like a lot of people are getting this wrong. Some people think that Callaway was driving the car. What happened was Callaway was a passenger in a car stopped for speeding. The cop told everyone in the car they needed to show ID for officer safety purposes, and legally in this situation, Callaway did not need to identify himself, but he did, and it led to his arrest. And just like that, the Dallas Cowboys said, you know what, you're out. I don't even understand why he would put himself in this position. I mean, there's only so many lifelines you could give a young man, and it's truly sad because he's a very talented player. It genuinely bothers me when you consistently have the opportunity to make a great career for yourself, constantly are given these lifelines once you make a mistake after mistake after mistake. And to be honest, I'm not necessarily anti-Devil's lettuce or anything, but I do associate it with laziness. I mean, like once in a blue moon, fine. If that's your thing, go do it. But I can say from personal experience, Whenever I am using said devil's lettuce versus when I'm not using said devil's lettuce, I'm always more productive when I'm not on the lettuce. And I understand everyone has a different lifestyle, but in the NFL or anytime you're given a job interview, you're not going to show up to the job interview stoned. And it seemed like Antonio Callaway was doing just that. He was given the opportunity to get his life together and have a lucrative job in the NFL where he could have secured generational wealth for his family. And ultimately, that's not what ended up happening. Hopefully he gets it together. And if he does, I'll be here to report on it. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.